People often say the deepest heartbreak comes from romantic love. They're wrong. The deepest heartbreak comes from the person who gave birth to you. I didn't lose my heart because someone left me. I lost it because my own mother looked at me and chose to turn away. For most of my life, I told myself she did her best, that she was tired, that she had too much on her shoulders, that I was strong enough to handle it. But there's a difference between being strong and being ignored. There's a difference between understanding someone's pain and being asked to carry it for them. I remember the moment my heart truly broke. Not when she raised her voice, not when she punished me, but when she stayed silent and let someone else destroy me right in front of her. That silence followed me into adulthood, into my marriage, into the way I learned to love, and into the way I learned to disappear. For years, I believed something was wrong with me, why I was never enough, why I was always the one expected to let it go, why I was always told to be the bigger person, even when I was the one bleeding. And then one day, I discovered a truth my mother had hidden for decades, a truth that explained everything, a truth that could have saved me, a truth she chose to bury, to protect herself. That was the day I realized something terrifying. I had two choices. I could become bitter, cold, resentful. I could become exactly like her. Or I could break the cycle she never had the courage to face. Before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. These stories are not just entertainment. They're reminders that healing is possible, even when the wounds come from family. If you ever need to pause this video and come back later, subscribing makes sure this story and others like it are always here for you. Now let me ask you something. What do you do when the person who taught you what love is also the person who taught you what abandonment feels like? And what happens when the moment you've waited for your entire life, the apology, the truth, the accountability, finally comes? But it changes nothing. Stay with me, because what happened next was not what anyone expected. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where lawns were trimmed every Saturday, where people waved politely, but never really knew each other. From the outside, my family looked stable, respectable, normal. Inside the house, things were different. My mother cared deeply about appearances. She wanted a family that looked peaceful, successful, and put together. Arguments were handled behind closed doors. Pain was something you swallowed. And weakness was embarrassing. I learned that early. I wasn't the loud child. I wasn't the rebellious one. I was the easy one, the one who didn't complain, the one who cleaned up without being asked, the one who learned very quickly that staying quiet made life smoother for everyone else. At first, I thought that made me special. I thought my mother trusted me more, that she relied on me because I was strong. But strength, I later learned, can become invisible. My siblings had clear roles in the family. One was the achiever. The other needed constant attention. They demanded space. They demanded protection. I didn't, so I didn't get it. When something good happened to me, it was acknowledged briefly. A nod, a short smile. Then attention moved on. When something went wrong, I was expected to handle it. "She'll be fine," my mother would say. "She understands." And I did. I always did. I understood when my birthday was forgotten because something more important came up. I understood when my feelings were brushed aside because someone else was having a harder day. I understood when my achievements were minimized so no one else would feel uncomfortable. Understanding became my job. There's a moment from my childhood that still comes back to me. I must have been around 10 years old. I had worked up the courage to tell my mother that something hurt me. Nothing dramatic, just a small thing that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. She listened without interrupting. Her face, calm, controlled. Then she said, "You're too sensitive. You take things too personally." That was it. No questions, no curiosity, no protection. I nodded, because that was what I was trained to do. From that moment on, I stopped bringing my pain to her. Not because it disappeared, but because I learned it had no place to land. I watched how my mother moved through the world, how she smoothed over conflict, how she avoided uncomfortable truths, how she chose peace on the surface, even if it meant damage underneath. And slowly, without realizing it, I learned something dangerous. If you don't cause trouble, you don't deserve attention. If you can handle it alone, you should. Love in our house was quiet, conditional, measured by how little space you took up. I didn't feel unloved, not exactly. I felt unnecessary, like someone who could be set aside, because they wouldn't fall apart, because they wouldn't make noise, because they wouldn't force anyone to choose. And my mother never chose me. Not openly, not loudly. She didn't push me away. She simply never pulled me close. At the time, I didn't have the words for it. I just felt a constant, low-level ache, like I was always standing just outside the circle, close enough to see the warmth, too far to feel it. That feeling followed me as I grew older, into school, into friendships, into the way I judged my own worth. I learned to overgive, to over-explain, to accept less than I deserved, because asking for more felt selfish. And all the while my mother watched. She didn't notice the way I disappeared into the background. Or maybe she did, and simply believed that this was who I was meant to be. At the end of the day, our house was calm. There were no screaming matches, no slammed doors, and that was what mattered most to her. What she never understood was this: silence can still break a child's heart. And mine was already cracking, long before I knew it. As I grew older, I began to notice a pattern. It wasn't something anyone ever talked about. It was something you felt. Whenever tension entered the room, my mother would freeze. Not in fear, in control. She believed that conflict was dangerous, that raising your voice meant losing dignity, that the worst thing a family could do was let other people see their cracks. So when problems appeared, she didn't confront them. She managed them. And managing almost always meant staying quiet. I saw it the first time someone treated me unfairly in front of her. A comment that crossed a line. A joke that wasn't really a joke. A moment that made my chest tighten. I looked at my mother waiting. Not for anger, not for a fight. Just for acknowledgement. She avoided my eyes, changed the subject, smiled politely as if nothing had happened. Later, when I asked her why she didn't say anything, she sighed, as if I was the one exhausting her. "You don't need to make everything a big deal," she said. "Let it go. It's not worth it." Those words became familiar, too familiar. Every time I was dismissed, blamed, or overlooked, the response was the same. Let it go. Don't stir things up. Be mature. I started to understand my role in the family very clearly. I was the one expected to absorb discomfort so others wouldn't have to feel it. My mother often said she valued peace, but what she really valued was quiet. Peace requires honesty. Quiet just requires silence. And silence always had a cost. There were moments when I tested the boundaries, when I pushed just enough to see if she would choose me. I remember one evening in particular, a family gathering, voices raised just slightly. A line crossed again. This time, I didn't stay quiet. I spoke up. My voice shook, but I spoke. The room went still. My mother's face changed, not with concern, with embarrassment. Afterward, she pulled me aside. Her tone was calm, but firm. "You made everyone uncomfortable," she said. "You should have handled it differently." I asked her what differently meant. She didn't answer. That was when I realized something painful. She wasn't asking me to be strong. She was asking me to disappear. From that point on, I stopped expecting her to defend me. Not because I didn't need it, but because hoping for it hurt more than accepting the truth. My mother believed that love meant keeping the family intact, no matter the cost, no matter who paid it, and I was always willing to pay. I told myself stories to survive it, that she loved me in her own way, that she didn't know how to show it, that she had grown up differently. All of that might have been true, but none of it changed how alone I felt. I learned to read rooms quickly, to sense when my presence was inconvenient, to pull back before anyone asked me to. I became skilled at swallowing words, at smiling through discomfort, at convincing myself that I didn't need anyone to stand up for me. But a child shouldn't have to learn that. And yet I did. My mother often praised me for being easy, for being understanding, for not causing problems. Each compliment felt hollow, like being rewarded for shrinking. She never noticed how much I was giving up. Or maybe she noticed and decided it was acceptable. Either way, the message was clear. If protecting me meant risking discomfort, she would choose comfort. If defending me meant facing conflict, she would choose silence. And slowly, quietly, I began to internalize a belief that would follow me for decades. If my own mother wouldn't speak up for me, then maybe I wasn't worth speaking up for at all. That belief settled deep inside me, waiting. And one day, not long after, it would be tested in a way I never saw coming. There's always a moment you can trace things back to. The moment when something inside you changes shape, when hope doesn't disappear, but it stops feeling safe. For me, that moment came when I was still young enough to believe my mother would choose me when it really mattered. I had gotten myself into trouble, not the kind that could be ignored, not the kind you could smooth over with a smile. Something serious happened, something I didn't cause, but somehow became responsible for. The details don't matter as much as the feeling. I remember standing there, heart-racing hands, cold, waiting for my mother to say, "That's not true," waiting for her to ask questions, waiting for her to look at me and see her child. Instead, she listened to everyone else first. Voices filled the room. Assumptions, accusations, people speaking about me as if I wasn't there. I tried to explain. My words came out clumsy and rushed. Fear has a way of stealing your voice. I looked at my mother again. This time, really looked. She wasn't angry. She wasn't confused. She was calculating. I could see it in her eyes. She was measuring consequences. Who would be upset? What would cause the least disruption? How to make this all go away as quickly as possible? And I knew before she spoke that the decision had already been made. She didn't mean any harm, my mother said finally. She understands what she did wrong. Her words landed like a verdict. I remember thinking, did she even ask what really happened? No one corrected her. No one challenged the version of events that had been created. And neither did I, because the look she gave me then, it wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was a look that said, "Please don't make this harder." Later, when we were alone, I asked her why she didn't say anything, why she didn't defend me. She sighed deeply, the way she always did when emotions became inconvenient. Sometimes, she said, you have to be the bigger person. That sentence followed me for years. At the time, I nodded. I always nodded. But something inside me cracked. Being the bigger person felt an awful lot like being sacrificed, like being asked to carry blame so everyone else could stay comfortable. I accepted the consequences quietly. I apologized for things I didn't do. I carried shame that didn't belong to me. And my mother watched me do it. She never checked in afterward, never asked how I was holding up, never acknowledged the weight she had placed on my shoulders. Life moved on, but I didn't. From that day forward, I stopped believing that fairness existed inside our family. I stopped believing that truth mattered more than harmony. I stopped believing that my pain deserved attention. I learned a new rule instead. Love meant not rocking the boat. Love meant keeping things calm. Love meant swallowing injustice with a smile. And I became very good at it. On the outside, I seemed fine, responsible, mature for my age. On the inside, something hardened. I stopped expecting rescue, stopped waiting for someone to notice when I was hurting, because the one person who was supposed to protect me had already shown me she wouldn't. That was the first time my heart broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. It broke quietly in the presence of the woman who gave me life. And the most painful part wasn't what she did. It was what she taught me in that moment. That keeping the peace was more important than protecting your own child. That lesson would follow me into adulthood, into relationships, into choices I didn't even realize I was making. And years later, when the truth finally came out, I would understand just how much that moment had cost me. I left home as soon as I could, not in anger, not with slammed doors or shouted goodbyes. I left quietly. That had always been my way. I told myself I was chasing independence, a fresh start, a chance to become someone new. What I didn't understand back then was that you don't outrun a wound by changing locations. You carry it with you. At first, the distance felt like relief. No tension in the air. No need to read moods. No constant pressure to keep things calm. I built a life that looked stable from the outside. A job that paid the bills. A small home that felt safe enough. Friends who knew me only as I presented myself. Competent, reliable, low maintenance. My mother and I stayed in touch. Brief calls, polite conversations. She asked about my work, about practical things. Never about how I was really doing, and I never volunteered it. I noticed something over time. She reached out more when she needed something. Advice, help, a listening ear. When I needed support, I hesitated. Old habits don't disappear just because you grow older. They settle in deeper. I became the person everyone leaned on. The one who handled emergencies calmly. The one who didn't ask for much in return. People called me strong, capable. I accepted the praise, even though it felt strangely empty. In relationships, I overcompensated. I gave more than I received. I apologized first. I stayed longer than I should have. Part of me believed this was what love required. Endurance, silence, self-sacrifice. My mother never commented on my choices. She never warned me, never asked if I was happy. She trusted that I could manage. She always had. Years passed like that, quiet, predictable. Then something shifted. One afternoon during a rare visit home, I noticed how small she looked. Older, more fragile. For a moment, I felt a surge of something close to compassion, maybe even hope. Maybe now she would see me, not as the easy child, not as the one who could handle anything, but as her daughter. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had learned to stay quiet years before. She talked about her worries, her fears, how overwhelmed she felt. I listened. I always listened. At one point, she looked at me and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words were meant as affection, but they landed heavily, because even then what she needed from me was strength. Not honesty, not vulnerability. Strength. I realized something in that moment. I wasn't a daughter to her. I was a solution. Someone safe, someone dependable, someone who wouldn't fall apart and make things complicated. And as long as I remained that person, there was no reason for her to change. I drove home that night with a familiar ache in my chest, the same one I had carried since childhood. I had left the house years ago, built a life of my own, but emotionally, I was still standing in that same kitchen, waiting for my mother to choose me. I didn't know it then, but the next thing I would learn would change the way I saw my entire past. Because the truth I was about to hear was something my mother had known all along, and she had chosen to keep it from me. The truth didn't come from my mother. It never does it? It came from someone who had no reason to protect her version of the past, someone who had nothing to gain by keeping the peace. We were sitting together, talking about things that didn't matter. Memories, names, old stories, and then almost casually, they said something that made my stomach drop. That wasn't your fault, they said. Everyone knew that back then. I felt my chest tighten. I asked what they meant. They hesitated. Not because they were unsure, but because they realized what they were about to take from me. The story I had carried for years was incomplete. They told me the truth slowly, carefully, what really happened, who was responsible, who spoke up, and who stayed silent. My mother knew. She had known from the beginning. She had known that I wasn't to blame. She had known the accusations were unfair. She had known the consequences would fall on me alone. And she had chosen not to say anything. I didn't interrupt. I couldn't. Each sentence felt like something heavy, settling into place, memories rearranging themselves, moments that never quite made sense, suddenly clicking together. I remembered her calm expression that day, her measured words, her quick decision. It hadn't been confusion. It hadn't been uncertainty. It had been a choice. I left that conversation feeling numb. Not angry, not yet, just hollow. On the drive home, I kept replaying the same thought. If she knew, then everything changes. The years I spent questioning myself, the shame I carried, the way I learned to accept blame automatically. All of it had been avoidable. All of it had been allowed. When I finally confronted my mother, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I simply asked, "Did you know?" She didn't answer right away. She looked away, adjusted something on the table, bought herself time. Then she said yes, just like that. Yes. No explanation, no apology. At least not at first. She told me she didn't want to make things worse, that speaking up would have caused conflict, that she was trying to protect the family. I listened. I had been trained to, but this time, something was different. Her reasons didn't land the way they used to. They sounded small. Protect the family. From what the truth? She spoke about how hard that time had been for her, how overwhelmed she felt, how she didn't know what the right thing was. And I realized something painful. She had been protecting herself, protecting her image, her sense of control, her need for everything to look fine. I asked her why she never told me afterward, why she let me carry that burden into adulthood. She said she thought it was better to let the past stay buried. I didn't argue, because suddenly I understood the pattern completely. Silence had always been her solution. Time was supposed to erase everything. But time doesn't erase pain. It just teaches it to hide. I left her house that day, feeling older than I ever had. Not because of what I learned, but because of what I lost. The last piece of hope I had been holding on to, the hope that she hadn't known, that she would have protected me if she could. That illusion disappeared quietly, and in its place came a new, heavier truth. My mother hadn't broken my heart by accident. She had broken it by choice. What I didn't know yet was how that realization would force me to make a decision of my own, one that would test everything I believed about forgiveness, loyalty, and who I wanted to become. After that conversation, I couldn't pretend anymore. The version of my mother I had protected in my mind no longer fit the truth I now carried. For the first time, I wasn't trying to excuse her. I wasn't trying to understand her choices. I was simply looking at her clearly. We met again not long after. This time, I didn't come with questions. I came with boundaries. I told her how long I had carried that shame, how it had shaped my relationships, how it had taught me to accept blame even when I wasn't wrong. She listened, but listening doesn't always mean hearing. She told me about her own childhood, about growing up in a house where conflict meant danger, where speaking up only made things worse. She told me she learned early that survival meant staying quiet, that keeping things calm was the safest option. As she spoke, I saw something I hadn't seen before: fear. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that settles into your bones and never leaves. For the first time, I understood that my mother wasn't strong. She was afraid of being judged, afraid of losing control, afraid of being blamed the way she had been blamed once. Her silence wasn't cruelty. It was a coping mechanism. That realization softened something in me. But it didn't erase the damage. Understanding someone's pain doesn't undo the harm they cause. It only explains it. I told her that. She looked surprised, almost hurt. "I did the best I could," she said. I believed her. But the best you can do is not always enough. She wanted forgiveness. Quick, clean. A way to put this behind us without having to sit in the discomfort. I couldn't give her that. Not yet. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to make her feel better. I didn't minimize my pain to protect her feelings. I sat with the silence. And so did she. That moment felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had, because silence this time was honest. She asked me what I wanted from her. The question caught me off guard. I had never been asked that before. I thought about it carefully. "I want you to stop pretending it didn't matter," I said. "I want you to understand that it changed me." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully grasp it. Not emotionally. She had spent a lifetime avoiding discomfort. Facing it now felt unnatural to her. As I left that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, clarity. I could see my mother as a whole person, for the first time. Not just the woman who hurt me, not just the woman I needed. A flawed human being shaped by fear and avoidance. That understanding could have been the end of it. A quiet acceptance, a distant peace. But life has a way of testing your boundaries. Not long after something happened that forced me to choose between repeating the same pattern or breaking it, between being the reliable solution once again or finally putting myself first. And this time, the cost of staying silent would be higher than ever before. The call came late in the evening. The kind of call that makes your stomach tighten before you even answer. My mother's voice sounded different, unsteady, smaller than I remembered. Something had happened, something serious. She needed help, not advice, not emotional support. Real help, the kind that requires sacrifice, time, energy, money. The rest of the family had already decided what they weren't willing to do. They were busy, unavailable, overwhelmed. And somehow, once again, all eyes turned to me. I sat there, with the phone in my hand, listening, feeling a familiar weight settle onto my chest. This was the moment I had been preparing for my entire life. Whether I knew it or not, I had every reason to say no, every justification ready. She hadn't protected me when it mattered. She had let me carry pain that wasn't mine. She had chosen silence over truth. No one would have blamed me for walking away. For the first time, I understood how easily bitterness could take root, how tempting it would be to let her feel the consequences of her choices, to give her the same quiet distance she had given me. But something stopped me. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't obligation. It was fear. Fear of what saying no would turn me into. I saw the pattern clearly now. The way hurt travels through generations. The way silence becomes punishment. If I turned away completely, I would be repeating the very thing that had broken me. I realized something then. I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom. I told my mother I would help, but not the way she expected. I set conditions, clear ones. I would support her in ways that didn't destroy me. I would not abandon my own life. I would not take responsibility for everyone else's absence. There was a pause on the other end of the line. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't rush, the one who didn't sacrifice without question. She agreed, reluctantly. And for the first time, I felt something shift. Not in her, in me. Helping her no longer felt like self-betrayal. It felt like a choice. That difference mattered. Over the following weeks, I stayed present, but firm. I showed up when I said I would. I left when I needed to. I didn't explain myself. I didn't apologize. My mother struggled with that. I could see it. She was used to control, used to silence. Boundaries made her uncomfortable. At one point, she said something that surprised me. "You've changed," she said. She didn't mean it as a compliment. I smiled anyway. "Yes," I said, "I have. For years, I thought strength meant enduring anything, taking on everything, never needing help. But real strength, I was learning, meant knowing where you ended and someone else began. I could help her without losing myself. I could care without disappearing. And for the first time, I understood the power of that choice. I wasn't becoming like my mother. I was becoming someone she never taught me how to be. And as strange as it sounds, that realization brought me peace. But the story wasn't over yet, because there was one final thing my mother had to face. Not from me, but from herself. And when that moment came, it changed everything between us. Something unexpected happened once I stopped trying to prove anything. Once I stopped explaining myself. Once I stopped filling every silence. The space between my mother and me changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough to notice. For the first time, I wasn't managing her emotions. I wasn't anticipating her needs. I wasn't trying to keep things smooth at my own expense. I was simply present. That was new for both of us. She struggled with it at first. I could tell. There were moments she waited for me to step in, to fix things, to absorb the discomfort. And when I didn't, the silence felt heavier than before. But I let it sit. I learned that boundaries don't need to be loud to be effective. They just need to be consistent. My mother began to see me differently. Not as the reliable solution, but as someone with limits. That wasn't easy for her. There were days she grew distant, shorter with me, less open. I didn't chase her. That might have been the hardest part. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't mean restoring things to the way they were. It means releasing the need to be understood. I wasn't forgiving her for her sake. I was doing it so I could stop carrying the weight. And forgiveness didn't require forgetting. It didn't require pretending nothing happened. It didn't require closeness. It required honesty. At one point, she asked me why I wasn't around as much. Her tone careful, testing. I told her the truth. "I'm still here," I said. "I just can't be everything anymore." She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She simply nodded. That nod said more than any words ever had. I started to notice changes in myself. Subtle ones. I stopped feeling responsible for everyone else's comfort. I stopped apologizing automatically. I stopped shrinking when tension appeared. The ache I had carried for so long began to loosen its grip. I was learning how to exist without bracing myself. For the first time, I understood that healing doesn't always look like warmth. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like saying less. My mother and I settled into a new rhythm. Not close, not distant, honest. And in that honesty, something shifted inside her too. She became quieter, more reflective, as if she was finally hearing the silence she had relied on for so long. I didn't push her. I didn't guide her. That wasn't my job anymore. What I didn't expect was that one day, without warning, she would finally say the words I had stopped waiting for. Words that didn't erase the past, but acknowledged it. And when she did, I realized something important. Healing doesn't come from getting what you were owed. It comes from choosing who you become after everything you weren't given. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No raised voices, no dramatic setting. Just the two of us, sitting quietly, time passing the way it does when nothing is being forced. My mother looked tired, older than I remembered. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and for once, I didn't rush to fill the silence. When she finally did, her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "I should have protected you," she said. The words landed gently, but their weight was immense. She didn't cry. She didn't justify herself. She simply spoke. She told me she saw now how often she had chosen comfort over courage, how she had convinced herself that silence was kindness, how she had believed that time would soften everything. "I thought you were strong," she said. "I didn't realize what it cost you." I listened, not with relief, not with triumph, with clarity, because by the time those words came, I no longer needed them to survive. They mattered, but they didn't control me. She admitted that watching me step back had frightened her, that seeing me set boundaries had forced her to face her own choices. "I didn't think I would lose you," she said. "I didn't think you would stop needing me." That was the moment it became clear. She wasn't grieving the past. She was grieving the version of herself who believed avoidance had no consequences. I felt compassion for her then, real compassion. Not the kind rooted in obligation, the kind rooted in understanding. But compassion didn't mean surrender. I told her that her apology mattered, that it helped. But I also told her the truth. We would never go back to the way things were. The distance between us wasn't punishment. It was protection. She nodded slowly. For the first time, she didn't argue. In that moment, I realized something powerful. Karma doesn't always arrive as destruction. Sometimes it arrives as awareness. Sometimes the consequence is seeing clearly what your choices cost the people you love. We didn't embrace. We didn't make promises. We simply sat there, two people acknowledging reality. And that was enough. As I drove home that day, I felt lighter than I ever had. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally stopped trying to fix it. I had broken the cycle. I hadn't punished her. I hadn't disappeared. I had chosen a different way, one that didn't require silence or sacrifice or becoming someone I didn't respect. My mother broke my heart, but she did not shape who I became. I did. And that more than forgiveness was my healing. As someone who has spent years listening to family stories like this, I can tell you one thing with certainty. The deepest wounds are rarely caused by cruelty. They are caused by avoidance, by the moments when someone should have stood up and didn't. Many parents don't realize the damage they cause when they mistake silence for peace, when they believe that keeping things calm is more important than being honest. They don't see how often the strong child becomes the invisible one, how the child who doesn't complain learns to suffer quietly, and how that silence shapes an entire life. What makes this story different is not the pain. It's the choice. Healing did not come from revenge. It did not come from cutting ties in anger. And it did not come from forcing forgiveness. It came from boundaries, from the decision to stop shrinking, to stop carrying what was never yours to hold, to break a cycle without becoming bitter. That is not an easy path. In many ways, it's the hardest one, because it requires clarity, it requires restraint, and it requires the courage to disappoint people who are used to your silence. If this story resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in these moments, I want you to know something. You are not weak for being affected by family wounds, and you are not cruel for choosing to protect yourself. If you found value in this story, please take a moment to like this video. It helps these stories reach others who may still believe they're alone in their pain. And if you want to continue exploring stories about family karma and the quiet strength it takes to heal, consider subscribing to this channel. Not because these stories offer perfect endings, but because they offer honesty. And sometimes honesty is the first step toward peace. Remember this: you are allowed to grow beyond the people who raised you. You are allowed to choose who you become, and you are allowed to heal without waiting for permission. Thank you for listening.